place at our college. Getting involved and staying involved with any of the myriad activities taking place at your college, faculty, or within York University as a whole is one of the keys to your success throughout your university studies. It may sound counterintuitive, but it's not. Getting involved with extracurricular activities or co-curricular activities is part and parcel of your university studies, and it's not something separate or just an additional unnecessary add-on. It is part of your ongoing growth and development that comes with your overall higher educational experience. It's the lifelong friendships that you make, the opportunity to meet and learn from outstanding world-renowned award-winning professors. It's meeting highly accomplished and distinguished alumni, such as our special keynote speaker this evening. So take full advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you, get involved, apply yourself to those things that you're most passionate about, and to develop and to hone those skill sets so necessary to fulfilling your career and life ambitions. We have an extraordinary program for you this evening. And before we get started, and I turn things over to York University Professor Rhonda Lenton for her opening remarks, we will start with our land acknowledgement. And I'd like to call on Destiny McDonald, who is the president of the McLaughlin College Council, and she'll present the York University virtual land acknowledgement. Destiny?
Thank you so much, James. Hello, everyone. My name is Destiny. I'm here at the Land Acknowledgements. So this meeting is virtual, and because of that, we are not all actually gathered in the same space. York's Land Acknowledgement might not represent the territory that you are currently on, and I would ask that if that is the case, that you each take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are on and its current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have longstanding relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tuckaranto has been taken care of by the Ashinabek Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampun Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region.
Thank you so much, Destiny. Now I'd like to call on President Lenton to deliver her opening remarks for this evening.
Thank you so much, James. Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir, bonjour. I want to thank James and all of those who have been involved in organizing the first year student forum at McLaughlin College. I also want to extend my own warm welcome and acknowledge McLaughlin College Fellow Howard Brown, our Dean of the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, J.J. McMurtry, and of course, our keynote speaker, Mayor John Tory. We so appreciate you taking the time this evening to join us, Mayor Tory, and we look forward to hearing the advice that you have for our students, perhaps even something that you wished you could have told yourself when you began your journey at our Osgoode Hall Law School. And finally, a warm welcome to all of our first year students from McLaughlin College. You are currently, as I'm sure you know, part of such a diverse and innovative community of about 55,000 York students. And when you graduate, you will join a global network of more than 330,000 alumni who are using the skills that they developed at York to drive positive change in their communities and around the world. Whether you began your journey at the university earlier in the fall or just this month, I know, of course, that these are not the circumstances that you expected when you first applied to York University. I want to make it clear that maintaining the health and safety of our community members is our highest priority. And that's why the majority of our courses are being offered to online and remote formats this academic year. But regardless of whether you're studying on campus or remotely, our commitment to you to provide a high quality and rewarding learning experience remains the same. Since our instructors and teaching assistants shifted courses to remote formats last March, they have continued to try to seek new and innovative ways to engage with students virtually, and even try to introduce virtual experiential education activities, internationalization activities, and research activities that our York students have come to expect. Just as one example, earlier this month, York's Schulich School of Business and Lausanne School of Engineering partnered with the City of Toronto and Startup India to host Together 2021. It was a 7-day virtual entrepreneurship bootcamp and venture competition where teams of student entrepreneurs from Canada and India were challenged to come up with solutions to real-world sustainability challenges. Beyond our programming, York offers a wealth of opportunities to explore your academic and personal interests outside of the classroom. And whether through your college, your faculty, or the wider university, I encourage you to join a council, club, or team, or explore one of the many work-integrated learning, internship, co-op, or leadership opportunities that are available to you. Remember that the connections you're making with peers, staff, instructors virtually will translate into in-person relationships when we are all able to come together on campus once again. And whether you are a first-generation university student, an international student, a mature student, our student supports, including academic and mental health services, are all available to you online as well. We will continue to adapt our offerings as necessary to ensure that you have the best possible university experience. But we realize that there may be aspects of this experience that need to be reconsidered as the pandemic continues to evolve. And so we want to hear from you. If there are issues you're facing or ways you think we can improve your experience, I encourage you to reach out to us. We host regular virtual town halls for the community where we welcome your questions and your ideas. The next virtual town hall is on February 8th, and I hope that I'll see you all again there. Welcome again to York University. We're delighted to have you as part of our community, and I want to wish you the very best for good health and academic success in the year ahead. Thank you. Merci, miigwech.
Thank you so much, President Lenton, for your remarks this evening for this very special occasion for our first-year students at McLaughlin College. Let me now call on the Dean of our Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, J.J. McMurtry, who is going to bring greetings from our faculty, as well as introduce the Honorable John Tory, Mayor of the City of Toronto.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you, President Lenton, and thank you, Destiny, for reading the land acknowledgement. So good evening and Happy New Year to everybody. I think it was just over a year ago, we were all gathered in person having this event. And I just want to say to start off how much I miss meeting people in person and how much I look forward to seeing you all in person when we can again. So on behalf of the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, I'm so pleased to be here tonight virtually for this very special event. A very warm welcome to our students, McLaughlin Fellows, and guests who are here tonight. For more than 50 years, McLaughlin College has engaged in critical conversations about public policy as they relate to our place in society. And by engaging with each other in these conversations and by sharing experiences and opinions, we continue to nourish this goal even here tonight as we gather virtually. And what an interesting time to be a McLaughlin student. This last year has been an extraordinary lesson in public health, in planning, in economic and public policy. The impact of COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdowns have reverberated across the world and here at home. And the pandemic has sparked a massive global economic lockdown that we have not seen since the Great Depression. Local governments, of course, have found themselves having to balance the health of their citizens with maintaining the economy and following public health orders, a very challenging job in these days. And the City of Toronto has been itself tasked with leading an emergency COVID response in addition to the day-to-day operations of running a city and keeping us all moving, safe, and healthy. Those in leadership have had to consider careful stay-at-home warnings, workplace closings, school closing, university closings, restrictions on gatherings, when to put people on skating rinks, when to close them, and putting these measures in place to keep us all safe all the time. So tonight, we're extremely lucky to have His Worship John Tory, Mayor of Toronto, as our keynote speaker. He has found himself leading Canada's largest city during the worst pandemic in a century. Working with public health and other public health experts, he has been behind new public health bylaws and orders to help prevent the spread of COVID and leading us all towards hopefully a COVID-free future. It is remarkable, in fact, that given his schedule, that His Worship is able to join us this evening. So without further delay, I'm pleased to introduce fellow Raptors fan and Mayor of Toronto, John Tory. Thank you so much.
Well, Professor McMurtry and President Lenton and Dean Simeon and Howard Brown, my friend, who first extended this invitation to me, and of course, most importantly, the students who are online. I'm very, very happy to be here tonight. I'm very happy as a graduate of York University to be here. I'll tell you a story about that actually, because when I got into the Osgoode Hall Law School, it historically was located in downtown Toronto and moved to York, I think, in the 1960s. And quite frankly, it was a topic of some discussion because in those days, I'm not sure York had yet garnered the respect that it has today. And certainly among the law students, they saw themselves as a sort of a class unto themselves. And in those days, literally your diploma said when you got your law degree, Osgoode Hall Law School, and no reference to York University. And I was the first student president who felt that it was appropriate that we should put York University on the diploma. And I worked with the dean on that and as the president of the student council, because I was actually quite proud of what York University was. And I'm very proud of what it is today, because if you go around the world, which I've had the chance to do as mayor, York University is well known and many of its constituent parts to people in other countries where it has established relationships and where its graduates have returned, in some cases having come from other countries. So you're in a good place at York University. And I will say as well about that experience that the other thing that I certainly can recall from those days was that the most important thing by far, and it's one of the reasons why there is some pain associated with being on a virtual basis to study for the first part of this year, the most important thing was the kind of socialization, the activities, the community of the campus. I'm one of those, and I was kidding President Lenton and told her I wouldn't say this, but it was true. I used to say all the time that I didn't, in order to try to prevent overcrowding of the library, I never attended the library until November 15th of the fall term and April 1st of the spring term, in time to do what was 2 or 3 weeks of very intensive studying. I did go to all my lectures, by the way, but you know, I did not go so as to avoid overcrowding in the library. I didn't go because I was so busy doing other things at college at York, really getting into the campus and making a lot of friends and participating in every activity. And I will just say, in terms of enriching my life and in terms of building a foundation for my career and making a lot of the friends that have been my lifelong friends, those were the activities, and that's the place where that all happened, is in all those other activities, not so much in the classroom. The classroom is important, but enjoy the campus, you know, while you have the chance. And I know you can't right now, but when you get back, which will be soon enough. And I should say on the pandemic, just a word on that. Some of you live around Toronto, so you're not far away. Others of you live elsewhere. You know, it's a difficult situation because while the numbers are better in the last few days, you only have to be, you know, go back to August and sort of look at days we were very happy because we had less than 100 new cases of COVID-19. Today, people are very optimistic because the numbers are down to 500 or 600. So it really just illustrates to everybody, including me, how far we have yet to go. And that just involves, unfortunately, the sacrifice that you're making, staying home, not being on campus, not being out from wherever it is your home is, not socializing with other people you don't live with, and so on, because that's the only way we're going to beat this thing, plus the vaccines, which, of course, I think will be rolled out in earnest to come this spring, and everybody will eventually get one. Younger people, of course, will be last, just because they're the least at risk in most cases. But you know, it's interesting. And when we get to the question period, I'm not going to speak for all that long. I would love to hear why the people in the generation that most of you are a part of have found it more difficult to follow the public health guidance and to stay home, because in fact the rate of infection has dramatically increased among some of the younger age groups in the last 6 months, contributing to the size of the second wave in large measure. And it's because in many cases people just haven't, I guess they've thought of themselves perhaps as being invincible, but you'll tell me that, because it has been a real challenge for us to try and communicate just how dangerous this pandemic is, and how you can suffer lifelong health impact from it. The rate of death, of course, isn't as high among younger people, but the rate of lifelong health impact is actually much higher than you might think. So I will just tell you that I'm also an optimist, not just because there's a vaccine and not just because all pandemics eventually come and go, and that we're fighting it and we're going to fight it to the ground. I'm an optimist because I think the city that in which you've chosen to go to school, and some of you will have lived here, is a city that is still admired around the world, and is going to continue to be, when the pandemic is over, a magnet for people to come from all over the world to live here, to study here, to invest here. We were a magnet before the pandemic. We will be afterwards. And why are we a magnet? Well, I think the principal reason is our way of life. There's a foundational set of values we have as Canadians, and this is not to put anybody else down or their respective values, but we have a foundational set of values that largely have helped us, for example, to avoid the kind of deep polarization you see going on even in the United States, our next door neighbor. I mean, they're a vibrant democracy, but you have to admit that there are some threats to that, or some strains on that, because of this incredible degree of polarization that has taken place. And we don't avoid that entirely up here, but I think we draw a consensus together on many more things. We are, I think, united as one in accepting people for who they are and embracing everybody and learning from them. And as others have said, benefiting from the differences that we have from one another in this, what is the single most diverse city in the world. But we have our own challenges. So I think that's a good reason: the foundational values, the way of life that is admired, the quality of life that is admired, the educational institutions, which are, of a caliber that is unsurpassed in the world, the critical mass of industries, the commitment to the arts and culture, the natural setting of the city, the proximity to the United States without actually being in the United States. These are all things that contribute to making Toronto a very attractive place to be. And if you think about it, none of those things have gone away. They're all still here. So if you were thinking of just coming here to study or making your life here, I think you're going to find there's a very, very bright future here. But the pandemic has laid bare some things that we knew before, some of them very close to the York University campus, not exclusively so, but we knew before, but has put a spotlight on them, and has caused us during the pandemic to find ways to deal with marginalized communities. But the real test is going to be how we can try to learn from that experience and make sure that we can provide better to demarginalize these communities as we go forward. We had as a first priority from the beginning of the management of the pandemic, looking after our most vulnerable populations in a way that set a gold standard. And I think we have. I think if you look, and I'm happy to go through in the question period, any vulnerable population you want to talk about, that we've set a standard that is actually followed and admired and watched around the world in terms of how we have tried to treat people. And it's not perfect, but I think it has gone a long way, and it's been done incredibly so in partnership with a lot of community-based organizations, whether they be the big ones that you know well internationally, the Red Cross and organizations like that, or whether it be a lot of small grassroots organizations that know people and people know them. So they trust them. When it comes to convincing people to get tested for COVID-19, there was a fear about that. There's a hesitancy about vaccination, and the hesitancy is only going to be overcome on testing and vaccination and things like that by proper laws that provide for sick pay and things like that to help people that have to work, in jobs where they don't have those kinds of benefits to have some security, but also just people you trust to get you over other kinds of hesitancy that people have about vaccinations and about getting tested. I will say that that we know some of the job that we were already started on before the pandemic to try and address this marginalization of communities, and it's in pockets around the city. But the pockets, in truth, have been growing over a long period of time, probably the last 10 or 15 years. And you've had fewer and fewer people that are what I call comfortable, and more people who are struggling, and very much less left in between. And this is obviously not something that's sustainable. It shouldn't be sustainable morally, but it shouldn't be sustainable otherwise from the standpoint of a successful city, the strength of the economy, and the success of the people who live here. And it also causes something else to happen, which is that it causes people to be, not deliberately, but it causes them to be excluded from the opportunity that is Toronto. I've been up in the vicinity in the northwest corner of the city, which has been among the hardest hit by COVID-19, as you know, because of the socioeconomic characteristics of the area. I've been up in the area where, at the same time before the pandemic, when there was a huge boom going on in the tech industry in downtown Toronto, principally in downtown Toronto. And when you were talking to some of the Somali moms, for example, up in that area, whose kids had gone to university and had got a degree, and they thought that they told their kids the right thing to do, the kids thought they were doing the right thing, but the success of the tech industry was about as far removed from those kids in their homes in Rexdale with their degrees in hand as it might have been if they lived 5,000 miles from here in some other country. And we had not yet found the way to kind of knit those two things together so that we, first of all, had addressed the moral issue of people having true equal opportunity in a country where we believe in that. But secondly, if you want to look at it from a more of a business case standpoint, we were going into battle in terms of the competition for prosperity and jobs and investment and opportunity with one hand tied behind our back because many people were not part of, effectively, were not part of the talent pool that we put forward to the rest of the world. So I would just say to you that our big challenge going forward is going to continue to protect those foundational values, to protect that combination of enterprise and empathy that has really allowed Canada to go forward. One, not without the other. You don't have the empathy without the enterprise. You don't have the enterprise without the empathy. We have both, and we have actually put it into our governmental and other kinds of institutions like our healthcare system so that it is a part of how we live. It's a part of that admired way of life. And we have to protect that and take many different steps to protect that, not the least of which is simply to stand up for it. And I think that we have to make sure that we stand up for the way of life, those foundational values. There is seeping into our culture some extremist elements that speak at different occasions and sort of show themselves a lot on social media. And they run the risk of causing the kind of polarization that we've seen take place in the United States. And I think that would be very damaging for the city and for the country and for their very bright prospects, their prospects that I think of as very bright. If I can offer you, and I'm happy to come back to any of these kinds of topics in the question period, if I can offer you one closing bit of advice with respect to what you might do as students. You've heard me say as students, you should get as deeply involved in the campus when you can return to the campus as you possibly can. Those are years of your life that you will not replace. You will not have the freedom to make of your own time in terms of things you volunteer for and sign up for and get involved in once you get into someone's employer, into self-employment. It just is different. And these are the best years, and they are the years to pursue something that you have an interest in, even outside of the academic setting. Secondly, keep an eye open for something in your career that you have a passion for. I keep running into so many people who either have been told what they should do or are motivated by the money you can make doing a certain thing, or they think that some job is more prestigious than another. And in fact, what really matters, the older you get, the more you learn this, is that you're happy doing what you've been doing. I've had 5 very different careers, none of them by plan. One was a lawyer. I guess you could say that was by plan because I went to law school. But then I forget in what order, I became a CEO of a big company, which I hadn't planned on doing. I became the commissioner of a sports league, the Canadian Football League, which I hadn't planned on doing. I became a talk show host on the radio, which I very much enjoyed doing. I'd never planned on doing. I would have said that's ridiculous if anybody had said that I would do that. But in each case, I thought they'd be fun to do. Fun in that sense of challenging and interesting, and yes, fun, and they make you smile and that you can have a good time. And of course, I've now been the mayor of a big city. And the common thread of all of these is that I enjoyed doing them. I had fun. I had a passion for what I was doing. And I will also tell you the common thread of all of the experiences was I was scared to death the first day I started. I'm not afraid to admit that because I think if you know that I felt that way and other people like me, whether they admit it or not, when you walk into a job that's brand new for you, especially in a career that's different from maybe the one you started out in, you're afraid that maybe you're not going to make the grade. Maybe you won't know what to do. Maybe this is something new to you and you don't really know how to do it. I'm sure my first talk show, I unfortunately do not have a recording of it, was probably the worst ever. But I got good at it because I listened and I learned and I worked with other people and I formed my own network of people to help me, and I did fine. I would just say to you, make sure you have that passion. Make sure that I think if you can have the blessing of having 5 careers, do it. Keeps you from getting bored. You learn new things, you meet new people, you make new friends. Get involved in the community once you're finished school. Like I really believe this to be more important than even the very valuable York University degree you'll carry out in your hand, is the friendships you form, the networks that you have, the experiences you have in charities, the community, nonprofit, advocacy groups, and so on. Get involved in all of that because it's way more important at the end of the day than your formal education or even your business experience, as much as that counts for something, depending on what line of work that you're in. So I'll stop there. And I just wish you all very good luck. And please do enjoy these years in your life. I know this is starting off with a bit of a rocky start because of the pandemic, but you've got 3.5 years to go. You'll be back on the campus. You will have a good time. They even have a subway coming here now, which we didn't in the days when I was coming to York, and that made it a bit of a pain to get there. But now there's a subway, so there's no excuse. And I just wish you all so well. And by the way, Dr. Simeon said something about how, well, normally we'd be having dinner, but we're not having dinner this year. That part's all canceled. When you get back to the campus, you should demand that the dinner be held. And that they have a dinner so that you can have a good time and share a beer or a glass of wine together and just have a good time. So thank you for listening, and on to the questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory, for your inspirational address to our first year students. And I promise you that we will be serving a dinner as soon as the lockdown is lifted. For this segment of the program, I'd like to turn to Professor Emeritus David Leighton Brown, who will be moderating the Q&A. Mayor Tory, I know that you said that you're eagerly awaiting the questions from our students and the other participants in attendance. So I'm turning things over now to Professor David Leighton Brown.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. A number of questions have come in, and I will keep monitoring others as we go along. But first, I'd like to ask you about your memories of York University as a student at Osgoode, and in particular, were there any faculty members, any professors who you were particularly would consider a favorite, or looking back on that you particularly learned from?
I always tended to find with my professors, and I bet you a lot of the students that are online tonight will agree with this once they finish their first degree and maybe go on to do others, that the ones that were the great storytellers were the ones that I really enjoyed. And I love going to the lectures, notwithstanding my comments about not going to the library. I love going to the lectures, and I did my reading, but I just spent the rest of the time doing other things. But I remember a professor by the name of Graham Parker, for example, another one by the name of Edward Bellababa, who today is a judge in the Superior Court here in Ontario. These were a couple of my law professors. John McCamus, who later became the dean of Osgoode Hall Law School. They were great storytellers. And by that, you know, law can be kind of dry. And I'm not trying to discourage any of you from going to law school. It's very interesting in a certain way, but it can be dry when you're sitting there talking about cases from the 16th century that form a precedent to the law that we respect today. And to bring that alive, to bring it to life, to tell the story of what happened in a given case that went back to the 16th century is a skill set that many of the teachers at York University have. In fact, many of them wouldn't be teachers at York University if they didn't have that ability. And so those were the people that I remembered. And I sparred with some of them because that was kind of fun to do. Maybe that was a precursor to being in the legislature or at city council, sparring with people that you spar with. But you know what? We did it in a spirit of good fun. And I will say, I hope that people work hard on the campus to make sure it's a place where, yes, there can be all kinds of exchanges of opinion, all kinds of differences between people, because that's what makes the world go around, but that it never is allowed to become the polarized kind of place that some people would make it. It's so important that universities exist as the ultimate place where free expression can prevail, and where people can exchange ideas and put outlandish ideas forward, but outlandish ideas that aren't hateful towards others and this kind of thing. So I just hope that in that kind of dialogue that should happen in the class with professors, between students, and between and among groups of students, that we can always remember that what separates us, what defines our way of life, is that we can do that in a respectful kind of way. And I think that's so important.
Thank you very much. Among your 5 careers, you've transitioned from law to politics. What advice would you have for students who have a passion for politics and aspire to a career in that area?
I don't think it matters what course you take. I don't think it matters if you even go to university. I think what you have to have is a profound interest in your community, in the people who live in the community, a great willingness to listen to people. The education I get that helps me be a better mayor is the education I get when I go to events and I get to listen to people tell me their stories. And they do tell you their stories because they like the fact they can approach you and say, here's my housing situation. Here's what's going on with my kids. Even a social conversation that doesn't have a big issue involved in it, you learn about people's way of life and how they experience the city and what they value in their life. And so I think what really matters is that you have that very passionate, keen interest in the community and in its well-being, and a desire to bring about some kind of a change in that community, change, for the better. And that you really like being among people. There are politicians who, for some reason, went into politics without really liking being with people. I could never understand that, because you have to like being with people. So to me, that's the key element. Whatever course you take, it will give you some knowledge, and whatever you do in your job, it will give you some experience that trust me, will be relevant to your experience as a decision maker. Obviously, it's easier to be the head of the budget committee if you are comfortable with finance and with perhaps with arithmetic. But you can learn anything if you have good people beside you. And I would just say the keen interest in the community, the networking, the caring for other people, the listening, those are the things you have to have, not a big fancy degree from anywhere or not a lot of experience having been in any particular profession.
Thank you. Given that today is Bell Let's Talk Day, could you share with the students some of the things that you personally do to maintain your own mental health, especially in these trying times?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I used to say that when people said, "What did I do in my spare time?" and I said that I worked. I find work actually very relaxing and very therapeutic. And fortunately, though, we all have to make sure that we have a support system of friends and family to support us. And I think that's the easiest place to find it. And sometimes it isn't your family. Sometimes it's only a friend or your friends. Other times it's only family. But the bottom line is we need to have a support system to see us through stressful times. I will say to people right now, I'll tell you as an example, during the pandemic, we set up something at 211. So if you dial 211 as opposed to say 911, we put in place mental health supports, and they were specialized mental health supports for youth, seniors, LGBTQ2S, plus what else, Indigenous, and so on, different groups of people to make sure we could get the right help for the right groups of people. We have had since the pandemic started, I'm not saying this because I'm proud of it, I'm saying it because it's a fact, 110,000 contacts with that telephone number because people are finding the time very stressful. And I will say to you as students, and I will say this is the kind of thing I hope you can be activist about, the degree to which we do not look after people suffering from mental illness in this rich society of Ontario today is a scandal. We have an experience outside supervised injection sites that we have in downtown Toronto that are meant to save lives from overdose deaths that we're still experiencing, and the hundreds we're experiencing even more before. And we have outreach workers that go to the outside of that clinic and try to persuade people to go into a treatment program so they can stop having a substance use issue in their lives. And we often will convince them, as hard as it can be sometimes, to go to a treatment program only to find there isn't one. What kind of a place is this? And they end up going to hospital emergency rooms where they can't really be properly treated, or worse than that, they end up on the street in a situation where some of them lose their lives. Our mental health infrastructure right now is not set up on the same basis that if you had a stroke or a heart attack, of course, you'd be looked after on an emergent basis and cared for to the highest level in the world. And mental health, people will sort of tell you that you should maybe try to get over it or try and cope with it and this kind of thing. And it's really not appropriate. But do find ways to make sure you share any feelings of stress you have with other people, whether it be friends and family. You need to have some people you can rely on that way in order to survive stressful times. And there will be stressful times that aren't pandemics. They just come up in your life, whether it be personal or business or professional or work or family stress. It's going to happen.
Thank you very much. There have been several questions that have come in expressing a desire for you to talk a little bit more about your own personal journey of how you got from where you started into the political career that you have now. And it may be hard to isolate any single turning point, but could you describe your journey a little bit for people?
Yeah, I came from a very privileged background. I came from a family. My father was a lawyer himself, and we were not lacking for anything. And I was given the benefit of a good education. And I saw it. So in that sense, I can't really say that the journey that I took would be one that would be available to everybody. But I will say that the opportunity to get involved in politics, which I did when I was 14, which came about only because I was offered the chance to go to a party on a Friday night if I joined a political organization for $1, that kind of opportunity will present itself to anybody. And you can make that opportunity if it doesn't present itself as it did to me. Volunteer organizations, whether it be political parties, charities, advocacy groups, I haven't found one yet that is overflowing with too many volunteers. Where if you walk in the door and say, "Hi, I'm here, I'm a first-year university student," even if you're 16 years old and you walk in the door, they'll say, "We can put you to work doing something." And that is where it begins in terms of your involvement in the community, in terms of the experience you get, because they do throw you in the deep end right away and give you responsibilities that no 16, 18, or 20-year-old would normally have. you make new friends, some of them people who can connect you up to opportunity as life goes forward. And so for me, that opportunity starting on that day when I was 14 years old really had more to do with my life's journey than, quite frankly, going to law school or going to different jobs in my career, because it got me to be an activist and to be somebody who then has in succession gone on to be involved in many, many different charities and advocacy organizations and so on, where I've met many friends and had many opportunities to take on responsibility. So that's what I would say is the key highlight in my journey. One thing that just led to the next. I was asked to take on each of these jobs that I had, just because somebody thought maybe I would be okay at it. And that's another thing to remember, by the way, when you're scared to death when you walk into a new job. Somebody had the confidence to hire you and thought that you could do the job all right. And whatever they are, whether they're the dean of a law school or the head of a charitable organization or the president of a company or a partner in a law firm, they're taking the chance on you by hiring you. So you should have the confidence of knowing they've already examined your resume pretty carefully and talked to you, and should give you a little bit of confidence and a bit less fear when you walk in that room.
Thank you. There's a question that references York University's disaster and emergency management program. And really as a prelude to asking you what the city of Toronto has learned from the pandemic about disaster and emergency management that you didn't know before the pandemic. In other words, what have we learned that we will do better the next time?
Well, I think, what we've learned is that there can be such a thing in the 21st century as a pandemic, because quite frankly, we hadn't really had one of this scale, of course, since 1918 and the Spanish flu. And I think that, I think everybody always sort of thought, well, it's happening somewhere else, or it really can't happen here, or if it happens here, we're so sophisticated now compared to 1918 that we can just deal with it. And we are more sophisticated in terms of our science and our healthcare facilities and so on. But as simple a thing as what they now call, it's now part of the lexicon, PPE, personal protective equipment. We thought we had a lot. And you know what? We did. We had big stockpiles of it. When you go to the hospital, as I had to do a couple of times during the course of the pandemic, and you watch how they're going through it, where every time they come into contact with any patient, they take off the previous set of gloves, they take off the mask, they take off the gown, put it into the waste and start with a new one. You realize how quickly, when you have, just in the city of Toronto, for example, 80,000 people that have come down so far with COVID-19, you realize how much you go through. Every encounter with another human being involves this level of care. And so I guess it just tells me that the kind of planning we thought we had, and previous people to me had done in the wake of SARS, which some of you were, I guess, just born for maybe, but it was a very limited outbreak. I mean, 44 people did lose their lives. It was a great tragedy, but the number of people who got SARS in 2003 was tiny compared to the 80,000 people in Toronto alone that have had COVID-19. So I just think no matter how good you think your plan is, it's not good enough. And that we're going to have to go back after this is over and do those plans all over again with a degree of thoroughness that we've never seen before. We're going to have to plan on, even though it seems like a waste of money, having huge stocks of PPE in order to be ready for a possible pandemic, which could come again a lot sooner than 100 years after this one. And that we're going to have some fundamental reexaminations of things like long-term care, because we found that the long-term care model that's been operated on for decades is putting the most frail senior people, our grandparents and great-grandparents and parents, at risk by definition. And they probably always were. We didn't know how much they were at risk until we had a pandemic to show us that. And we've lost so many lives in these long-term care residences. And so these are the kinds of lessons we've learned. And it's going to be a lot of work to be done when this thing's over, examining those questions and putting together a much better plan.
Okay, a couple of other questions that have to do with the city of Toronto and the policy issues facing you as mayor and city council. The first, other than the pandemic, what are the top 2 or 3 issues that you really see face our city?
Well, I said on the night that I was reelected 2 years ago that the biggest issue I faced in the next 4 years now, too, but we've had 2 pass already, was this growing gap between those who were comfortable and those who were struggling. And if you ask me the number one, I always think the number one subheading underneath that is the availability and the opportunity to get good jobs. Because if people have good jobs with a relative degree of security and and reasonable compensation, whatever those jobs are, with security being very important and maybe a career path involved, it is going to make them better able to provide for housing and for food and so on for themselves and for their families. But underneath that, right underneath, as a kind of almost tied for first, is affordable housing. The city has grown so fast. I mean, I'm proud of the fact, on the one hand, that our city is the fastest growing city in North America, one of the fastest growing in the world, because people are coming here from all over the world, which again has been a huge blessing to us in terms of the richness of the faculty at York University, for example. I don't know how many of them were born outside the country, but I'll bet half, maybe more. And those are people that have come here to share, what they have with us and to share it with you. And so, but the problem is, as 100,000 people come here every year, we need to have places for them to live. And as the cities become more and more successful, it became more and more difficult for people in good, secure, important jobs that we have valued so much during the pandemic, to be able to afford to live here. The frontline heroes that we have from the pandemic, the nurses and the people who work in the hospitals and the TTC drivers and the people who work in grocery stores, many of them were finding that they couldn't live in Toronto anymore. And so the challenge of affordable housing rose right up to the top of the list, and it's right alongside the economy and the ability of our economy to create jobs for people. And we're hard at work on that now, taking city land and repurposing it for affordable housing, building supportive housing for the people I referred to earlier on that had mental illness and substance use issues in their lives, where they need to have not just affordable housing, but supportive housing with supports built in so they can get their lives back on track. And this is a huge priority for us now. And then the third one would be probably public transportation, just people being able to get around the city. You can't access the opportunity that's downtown from Rexdale very easily if there isn't transit to get you there. Transit is not about drawing lines on a map, it's about connecting people to opportunity. And the reason some of the neighborhoods in the far corners of the city are marginalized is because they're in the far corners of the city, and we did not build for decades the transit to move people back and forth between those areas, and even to encourage people to create jobs in those areas, so that people who might live downtown could come to the Northwest End easily and get a job there, or go to school there at York. That's why the subway's there.
There are a couple of questions that flow directly out of what you have just said. First, on the economy. The question is almost impossible to answer in any finite way, but maybe you can talk about the stages we would have to go through. It's really a question about how long after the pandemic is over will it take for Toronto's economy to be fully renewed. So what are the stages we will have to go through before we think we are fully renewed?
Well, first of all, we're going to have to go through a staged reopening, because it's not going to be that we're going to even have things open up again in kind of some 2-week period, 6 weeks from now. It's going to take longer than that. Secondly, there's been some carnage that has been, caused by the pandemic, where there have been businesses that have just disappeared. They've gone out of business, they've closed, they've gone bankrupt, and this is a tragedy. But it's a real tragedy you can see by walking down any of the sort of main streets in neighborhoods and see the number of small businesses and even some bigger ones that are closed. I think the one thing that is not missing is there is some money in the pockets of consumers. Even those who are of modest means have not been spending the kind of money, because you can't spend money in restaurants that you can't go to. You can't spend money on as much of the kind of shopping, although people do a lot of online shopping. So I think there is some savings, they say, that is out there. So that is a reason for hope. And I think this city will grow again, because immigration, once it starts again, it will create the need to have more housing, to have all the different businesses and organizations that serve people. So if the answer to your question, I think it will be a number of years, where before we get back to full strength. But if you said to me on any relative basis, where would I rather be in the world? And I'm arrogant enough as mayor, I don't mean arrogant, maybe confident is a better word, to believe that if people had a choice today between going to Toronto, New York, or London to take a job and to forge a new life for themselves, that we would do way better than we've ever done before in terms of those people coming to Canada because of our values, to Toronto because of of our values and our opportunity, and because of how we've handled the pandemic, and because of that way of life that I described earlier on. And so I think that will help us to rebound faster. And look, North Americans are very resilient. And I say that about Americans as well as Canadians. We're very resilient. I mean, and I think that the resilience will carry us a long way, helped along by things, believe it or not, like the arts and culture and the educational institutions, the advocacy groups that sort of breathe new life into a place that has been, badly hit by the pandemic. So I'm an optimist about these things, but it will take a number of years before we get back to normal, and a number of months before we even get back to anything resembling normal.
You some time ago mentioned the tragedy in long-term care homes as one of the worst aspects of the pandemic. There's a question asking for your expectation of the future with regards to long-term care homes. Do you think that we will see an elimination of for-profit private long-term care homes, or do you think that will continue to be a part of the landscape?
I think it will either be replaced by nonprofit, and nonprofit includes, for example, the city of Toronto itself owns 10 long-term care residences. And the fact is, and I'm not saying this in any boastful way, because we've had a share of tragedy in some of our homes as well, but the fact is, on any relative basis, we have done better. And we've done better because we could take the money that normally would go to a profit margin. And I'm a free enterprise person, so I understand the need to earn a profit in order to continue to reinvest in your business. But the fact is, if you're on exactly the same money provided by the government trying to earn a profit, you are going to be able to provide less care than the person who's not trying to earn a profit. And so I think either we're going to move to a nonprofit model of some kind in some way, or it will turn into a much, much more highly regulated business. Because the fact of the matter is that, and look, we made some changes in the middle of the pandemic to the way we staffed our long-term care residences, for example, because we too had people who worked in more than one residence. And what this led to from the standpoint of a pandemic was people coming and going that were inadvertently carrying the virus into the long-term care residences, where the people there were much more frail and vulnerable. And so we stopped that by simply saying you can work in one of our residences, and we had to make adjustments to their pay, and we did that at some cost to the city government. But we felt that was the right thing to do as soon as we learned that lesson, as it were. We took rooms that had 4 people in them, and we moved people into common areas and so on, where we could care for them in a more spaced out way, because we knew those 4-person rooms were a place where the virus could more easily spread. And so whatever is going to go on, there's going to have to be a fundamental reexamination of all of this, and really fundamental, not tinkering, fundamental. And that either will mean a different business model entirely, which has been proven to work better, nonprofit, or it'll mean some kind of a much more highly regulated business. So we simply can't see the kinds of things happen that have happened, not just in the pandemic, but especially in the pandemic.
Okay, a question of a very different order. Given the highly polarized political climate, more so in the United States than for us, fortunately, but still highly polarized, how do you explain the apparent bipartisan kind of support that you have received in the elections that you have been successful in as mayor?
It's actually true. I mean, I was elected by a coalition of liberals and conservatives, and even some New Democrats, and had support in the last election where I got 64% of the vote. Against a very formidable and very well qualified opponent. I had votes from a lot of people who would have voted more traditionally NDP, but it's because it's 2 things, I think, and these are not qualities that rest in me personally, but rather just a determination I had. First of all, I declared myself from day one and have behaved as a nonpartisan mayor. And I don't belong to a political party. I don't go to political meetings put on by political parties. I work with people in all parties. And since I've been the mayor, I've worked with 2 different prime ministers from different parties and 2 different premiers from different parties. Secondly, I'm not an ideologue. And I think in municipal politics, especially, but in any politics, not being an ideologue is very helpful. Because the problems today are so complex that there is no ideology. There is no partisan platform that has the answer. And I think that the more you're willing to listen to anybody and everybody that might have a good idea, and to sit down with people and work with them, the better off you're going to be in solving what are incredibly complex and intractable problems, like we've discussed, like mental health, like homelessness, like substance use issues. These are not issues that lend themselves well to ideology. They're issues that need all hands on deck. Every idea is welcome to some extent or another. And I think that's been one of the reasons why I've been able to maintain the confidence of the public, because they can see that I'm not trying to polarize. And then the third thing is how you conduct yourself. And I inherited a city that had been amalgamated forcefully. Some of the people that are watching tonight are too young to even remember that, but there were constituent municipalities. Scarborough was its own city. Toronto was its own city. North York, where the university is, was its own city. And they were all put together into one big city, the 4th biggest city in North America. And there was a huge polarization between and among the different parts that were kind of forced together. And I understood that because they were forced together. But I've tried to make sure that I get those areas of the city to work with each other, to expand things like even the active TO where we close some of the streets for biking and so on. Hopefully next year we can expand it to all parts of the city so nobody's resentful that they have something downtown we don't have here. And so that's how I've managed to do that. And it's something that it's not perfect. And I'm certainly far from perfect, but I've been determined to bring someone who brings people together. And I think if you have the determination to do that, you can do it. Excuse me.
Thank you. A technical question has just come in that I'm sure would be of interest to many people and maybe something that speaks to communication issues more widely. Are vaccines going to be available for new immigrants who do not have OHIP?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question. Now, in the city of Toronto, we have a policy, we're called a sanctuary city. And when somebody shows up to receive any service from us that's provided by the city, they're asked, not asked questions about their citizenship and whatnot. I do believe it is necessary for you to have a health card in order to obtain your vaccination. I believe that's true. But I don't know how we're going to handle people who are brand newcomers or people who are here, for example, as refugee claimants, or even people who are here studying. I just don't know the answer to that question. What I do know is that we're prioritizing the order in which people will get the vaccines. And we started, as people will know, I think, with long-term care residents and staff. We're working our way through frontline healthcare workers. And then to oversimplify it a bit, it will go to groups by age. So the very elderly, who are by definition more at risk, will get it first, and then down by age bands probably. And there'll be other vulnerable communities who will be put into the prioritization that's set by the provincial government at that time. I'm happy to check, and if there's some way to communicate with this group later on. I just don't know how they're going to handle people who are either undocumented in one way or another, or who are in a particular kind of group like you mentioned. But I can't believe that we're going to say to someone who's resident here that they can't be vaccinated, because that puts everybody else at risk, leave alone them. And so I would think that's the way we'll resolve it, but I just don't know.
Thank you. All right, we've come to the end of our time, and you especially have had a very long day, and we need to release you. But one closing question.
Yes.
We've been asked how you think the Maple Leafs will do not having to go through Boston in the playoffs this year.
Well, I said to somebody this morning, and I don't mean to be cynical about this, I'm older than most of the people watching. And so therefore, the entire drought of 50 some odd years that the Maple Leafs have gone without winning the Stanley Cup, I've been there for all of it. And I was around and a fan when they won the Stanley Cup in 1967, which is a long time ago. I said to somebody this morning, I wish they had a trophy to give out, even the Stanley Cup, for the performance of a team in the month of January, because if so, we would be winning that trophy, because we're in first place, not only in the Canadian division that's been created this year, but first place in all of the NHL. But I will say this, and I've said this for many years so people can roll their eyes. Not most of the students won't have heard me say it, so it'll be first time for them. I think they've got the young talent. They brought in a couple of veterans to kind of bring that kind of gravitas that veterans bring. And I think they've got the right stuff to go all the way. But I've been saying that, and I have said on the record to a number of the sports journalists on the air and in the newspapers that I believe the Toronto Maple Leafs will win the Stanley Cup during the time that I'm mayor of Toronto. And so I stand by that. I don't know exactly what period of time that entails, but it's at least 2 more years that I have in my current term before I have to make a decision about what to do. And the people have to make a decision about me. So I'll stand by that. And I'll say that I think they're going to do very well this year, and they could go all the way.
All
right. What would you expect me to say?
Optimist. All right. Thank you very much, Mayor Tory.
Thanks a lot. And good luck to all the students. I'm really sorry your first year has started this way. It's such a special time. When you can come to the campus, you'll have a wonderful time at York. It's a great school. It's got a great reputation in Canada and around the world. You'll be well served by your education and the other activities that I mentioned. Just remember, get involved. Be involved in as many things as you can be. Make as many friends as you can. They will be your friends for life, and there'll be people who you'll run into all the way along the pathway of your journey. And so but I wish you so well. Maybe I'll come up. Maybe I'll come up if you have that dinner that Dr. Simeon, I heard him promise it myself. It's on the recording here. So if you have that dinner, I will make every effort to see if I can't come up and say hello to you all in person.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Professor Leighton Brown, for moderating the question and answers segment, and also for Mayor Tory for answering these incisive and important questions that have been posed to you. And we certainly will hold you to your commitment of making sure the Toronto Maple Leafs bring that cup home since 1967 being the last time they've actually won it. At this point, I'd like to call on our college fellow, Howard Brown, who's one of the most active, actually, college fellows in our college, and to thank our distinguished guest of honor and keynote speaker, the Mayor of the City of Toronto. So, Howard.
Thank you, Dr. Simeon. Mayor Tory, Professor Linton, Dean McMurtry, Destiny, and of course, Professor Simeon, and everyone in attendance this evening at the McLaughlin College First Year Forum. I just want to say how delighted I was to be asked by Professor Simeon to provide the thank you to Mayor Tory this evening. When we heard what we heard this evening from Mayor Tory was the importance of things like empathy and enterprise and being scared in that first day on the job. And I think one of my takeaways from this evening, and it's been something I've always admired about John Tory, is his total commitment to public life and civic affairs, community engagement, and how important that is to students. And really, I think that will be one of the great legacies of Mayor Tory, his mayoralty. It is something that I've admired and that he continues to be admired for. I like that he mentioned he started as a student leader, joined a political party at 14, was president of his party's youth wing at the age of 20. It was during that time in youth politics that I first met Mayor Tory, and I knew he was going places. And the reason I knew it is I had the pleasure at the time of being the head of another political party's youth wing. He was 20 at the time, I was 21. He was at Osgoode, I was a Ryerson journalism student at the ripe old age, older than him. But the issues that we fought for as young people are as relevant today as they were decades ago. Mayor Tory, you talked the importance of a career path. You talked about the importance of affordable housing, something we talked about back then, the importance of public transit, still as important as ever. And I found in my clippings today, Mayor Tory, this Toronto Star article from those times in 1975, Backroom Babies, you know the story. Young organizers are big wheels in provincial election machines. And I showed that to people before the start of the meeting. They said, that looks like Bill Clinton. And then I said, what about this? I said, what about this guy at the bottom? That long-haired hippie with the beard is this guy.
Abby Hoffman.
Very little hair today. So I pulled out that clipping today to share it with everyone. And what it really is, that article and our lives 45 years as friends speaks volumes and still does now. I truly believe, Mayor, when you speak out on an issue, people listen. And I've always felt that. It was interesting, 2 years ago, the province was imposing some major cuts to the city public health budget. And I remember chatting with you, Mayor, at Katz's Deli on a Friday afternoon, an event that Councillor Cole was holding. And I said, keep up the good fight, Mr. Mayor. And I think the Premier listens to you, and you were a little concerned, you know, does the Premier listen to me? And I remember the next morning, it's a Saturday morning, you canvassed on Chatsworth in our neighborhood with Councillor Cole. That was Saturday morning. 2 days later, the Premier altered his position and restored much of the funding to public health. And that was one of the days, that was really a day when I knew that the John Tory that I believed in, that can bring together this consensus, bring together people in a way that is just so beautiful. And I was so proud to back you in running for mayor. You, to me, are the epitome of hard work and phenomenal public service. This is truly an honor. This is the first time I ever had the chance to speak publicly to you, and it's very, very an honor. And I wish you best of luck in your continued leadership in keeping our city safe in the fight against COVID, in showing the leadership and continuing the great work for our city. And I just want to, on behalf of everyone at McLaughlin tonight in this student forum, thank you so much. I was going to say, we want to have you back next year when we can come in
I'm
person.
coming to that dinner, Howard.
I'm sorry?
I'm coming to that dinner.
I want you there. I want to tell you, it's great to see you. Thank you for doing this tonight. And I look
Thank you.
forward to sharing many other good times with you. And just from the bottom of all of our hearts, thank you for being here.
Thank you very
Great
much.
job you did tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate your kind words and your friendship. I thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night,
you so
everybody.
much,
Thank you very
Howard.
much. Okay.
Thank you so much, Howard, for your comments. And Mayor Tory will be sending you some gifts by mail, so you should be receiving them. But this has been an extraordinary evening. And thank you so much again, Mayor Tory, for being with us. You're leading one of the most multicultural and most dynamic cities in the world. And I'd like to thank everyone actually for joining us here this evening for our McLaughlin College First Year Student Forum. I'd like to thank President Rhonda Lenton for being with us this evening. Also, the Dean of the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, J.J. McMurtry, and our very own Professor Emeritus David Leighton Brown, and of course, Howard Brown, for all the work that he does at McLaughlin College on our behalf. And of course, I'd like to thank all of the staff and the students who have assisted and helped to organize this event and participate in it. Vicky Carnavale, Destiny McDonald, Andrew Presnell, Emily Blythe, and all of our student leaders. And there are far too many of those people to actually mention them here this evening. So stay safe, everyone. Stay well. And we hope that by this time next year that we'll be able to hold this event face to face at McLaughlin College, and we'll have the dinner there. Just a quick word, reminder to people out there that we have a number of other major events coming up. The McLaughlin College Union Debate is going to take place on February the 11th, and that'll be on the COVID vaccines and the return to normalcy. We're also going to be celebrating the UN World Day of Social Justice, and that's going to be held on February the 23rd. Both of these events are from 12:30 to 2 p.m. So please visit our college website for more details about those events and all the other activities that we have at McLaughlin College this academic year. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again at our forthcoming McLaughlin College events during the course of the academic year. So good evening, all. Stay safe and well.
Good
Thank
night,
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Good night.